All right, joining me now, Caitlin Cooper covering the Indiana Pacers for us here. She does Basketball She Wrote. Make sure to sign up for that Patreon. Is tremendous content, and really appreciate Caitlin for all that she brings to the basketball community here. Caitlin, the Indiana Pacers. Let's talk about them. 7-4 record to begin the season, and 2-0 now in the in-season tournament. But the biggest story about this group has to be just how unbelievable Tyrese Haliburton is, right?
Right. I mean, somehow it turns out that a little bit more of Tyrese Haliburton is actually even better than the normal amount of Tyrese Haliburton. I think that's kind of where it's been. It's not that his usage has gone up a ton or he's taking that many more shots, but he's taking a few more and his efficiency is somehow even better. He's well above 50, 40, 90 right now, up to scoring average by around 4 to 5 points. So getting even a little bit more of him has been a huge boon to the Pacers offense, which is currently ranked number one in the NBA, including in the half court. So
Number one in the NBA, 32 assists to zero turnovers over the course of these last two games for Tyrese. And both come against the Philadelphia 76ers, which is, I mean, one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference, especially. They've been tremendous. 3 of 6 from three for Tyrese in the first game, 7 of 12 from three in game two. Just watching that, it seems like he continues to push himself and the Pacers continue to push him. Take the pull up three. You are really good at it. And I know he gets like the shooting form gets talked about a lot, but he makes them and he is improved in such a tremendous way for like a player that I think a lot of people thought would be a role player at the NBA level. He is a true blue superstar.
yeah, I mean, there was one in the second game against Philadelphia on Tuesday night where he literally was dribbling up in transition, and I don't know that I've ever seen him, let alone, probably just about Steph, maybe, fake a handoff to Obi Toppin in transition at the 3-point arc, fake it, and then just automatically turn and pop a three and make it. I was trying to look up on Second Spectrum if that event had occurred back to back where somebody faked a handoff and then made a three, and I couldn't find a return. So
It's
that's,
wild.
that's the type of stuff that Tyrese is doing right now.
But he's so creative and he's so like the decision making. I made a point about this a couple videos ago about how awesome the decision making always is with him. He's always been a low turnover guy. He's always driving positive offense. And the simple act of not making mistakes when you're out there, it helps everything where everybody knows where to be. Everybody can expect the ball in the right place at the right time. And he has helped elevate this group to the best offense in the NBA. And I don't know if it's going to keep up. Like it's still very early in the season, but I don't see any reason why this should stop. That he is making consistent reads, and Indiana is taking advantage every single time. It's been really cool to see. Uh, Myles Turner, second option on this team, kind of the less heralded member of that pick and roll duo and that pick and pop duo. But what does he provide for Indiana that helps them become so special on that end?
Well, yeah, man, I think you could see it in this two game against Philadelphia. It's been a real hurdle for Miles over the years to play against Joel Embiid. In part because a lot of times he's just not on the court against Joel Embiid. He gets into early foul trouble, which was again the case in this game. He picked up early fouls. The Pacers were going through practically every center. They survived playing Obi Toppin and Aaron Nesmith at the five and actually built a lead. But then a big turning point for him is over the last 6 minutes, Miles comes back in to go against Embiid, and the Sixers don't cross match that for whatever reason, and he's really putting Embiid into space. A lot of times, like, Embiid's not really a guy who's going to go out there against a stretch shooter. Typically, he's kind of going to wave, like, somebody else go do it, and I'm going to stay low because my rim protection matters. So that's kind of free points, but Miles is shooting above 40% from three to start the season on pretty decent volume. And what you are seeing, because Miles and Jalen both play somewhat similarly, is they can kind of carry over their style from the starting unit to the bench. And while I don't completely believe in the idea of a stretch five in terms of what it does to opposing rim protectors, because a lot of times, like I said, the rim protector's still going to stay back. You are seeing them draw weak side defenders over and stunts over to the point where now if you're playing Buddy Hield adjacent to that pick and roll, it's basically a cheat code. Like, what are you doing then? Like, if Miles has hit a couple threes in that game to the point where, the Milwaukee Bucks are sending a stunt or the Sixers are sending a stunt, and then you have Buddy there to either cut that stunt or just make a three, and you have Tyrese Haliburton who can, look off a defender, he'll stare at Miles, that stunt will run at Miles, and then he'll throw it to Buddy. Like, there's just a lot of unpredictability, and especially with, like, their Spain pick and roll actions, even when Tyrese hit that dagger against Philadelphia, Buddy didn't play particularly well in terms of box score stats in that game, but him leaking out of the Spain pick and roll action confused Philadelphia's defense just enough that now Tyrese is hitting a dagger. So the three of them in combination together just give you a lot of different options that you can go to. And Myles has grown, I think, to an extent in what he does against switches as well. He's really gotten a little bit better at doing the little half shoulder turn, half fake against the switch or even against a big so that he can get to his hook shot, which has grown for him over the last year and a half, I would say.
He's awesome. And the way that those three in particular work in concert together has always been improving, but now it is at this elite level, and teams are struggling to figure that out. And I have no idea how I would guard that if Tyrese is distributing the way that he is and is now capable of scoring the way that he is. Who do you even go to in that situation? Who are you running off the 3-point line when all of those guys are shooting the way that they do? Buddy is like one of the most dangerous shooters we've ever seen. So,
well, and
not
another
really
element.
a surprise.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Another element too is they are number one right now in points scored out of picks per chance, according to Second Spectrum. So something that they do is they set more non-contact screens or more ghost screens than any other team in the NBA per 100 possessions by quite a bit. And like when you said that Tyrese is always going to find the advantage, that's kind of part of it too. Because like even in that Sixers game, the Sixers literally pivoted to putting Joel Embiid on TJ McConnell so that they could keep him around the basket. The Pacers were just like, okay, well, we'll just use TJ McConnell as the screener then. So Embiid has to come up closer to Tyrese. And as soon as he does, Tyrese is like, oh, I'm just going to reject that pick. I'm going to draw the person off the read spot, and now I'm finding Obi Toppin. And Obi Toppin hasn't shot the three particularly well to start the season, but he does do a lot of cutting underneath and around the pick and roll to the point where, they had the second highest output in franchise history against the San Antonio Spurs. And a pretty decent part of that was Victor Wembanyama was guarding Obi Toppin as like he likes to do on the weak side. And he just takes up so much space that the Pacers were like, hey, literally anytime you're on the ball side and Victor's guarding you, you're moving to the other side of the court. You're making a shallow cut. You're cutting underneath the basket, and that just makes the pick and roll that much harder to defend against them because now who's the tagger? It's those types of things.
Yeah, it is, I think, a creative mind's dream in a lot of ways, and it's one of the reasons why we value your input on this and your ability to see this and to kind of diagnose how it goes, because Indiana is such a creative team in the way that they use these guys and the way that they take advantage of Halliburton's ability to see the floor. 11 to 13 points. You've got 6 different players on the roster that are averaging between 11 and 13. And that doesn't happen if you don't have a guy who is willing to distribute the ball all around the floor. Just who among that group? Is it Bruce Brown? Is it Benedict Mathurin? Is it like who among that group has really stood out in a way where maybe not separating themselves, but better than expected?
Yeah, I think you said it best. Like Tyrese is so inclusive, and because of the fast pace that they play at, it can really be anybody that goes off on any given night. I think that Ben had a really big and important step for him against the Milwaukee Bucks. Not even so much because of what he did on offense, and he scored 26 points in that game, and he scored at all three levels in that game, but because of what he did at the end of the game defensively. And I think what got most of the attention is the fact that he stripped the ball from Giannis Antetokounmpo twice, and it was really good that he sat on that spin move. And it was better because the Pacers actually sent a few double teams, which they can be pretty reluctant to do. But he also was guarding Chris Middleton at the end of that game, too, and prevented Chris from turning over his left shoulder. He got switched on to Brook Lopez and boxed him out. Those types of things are the stuff that the Pacers really need because, like we pointed out, their offense is so formidable to start the beginning of the season that they don't have to be a good defense. They don't even have to be a bad defense. They just need to not be a terrible defense. If they're merely like, meh, that's not great. Like they're outscoring people by a sizable margin in terms of net rating. So seeing Ben take those steps, if I'm the Pacers coaching staff after I see that, I'm just like going to be running that on an infinite loop at practice and being like, hey, we know you can do this now. Like you were not great through the first 7 or 8 games, like a lot of off-ball lapses. You got cooked by Karis LeVert. There's a reason you haven't been in the closing lineup, but we left you out there in this game and you did this. So that was, to me, really critical to start the season. Then overall, I just think Aaron Nesmith has been really terrific for the Pacers. They signed him to an extension early, but I don't know how many people who don't regularly watch them know that like he was the starting 4 for them last year. He's been coming off the bench at the 4 this year. He plays a lot of different positions. Most importantly, perhaps, is that like when Myles and Isaiah Jackson, Jalen Smith gets hurt, he comes in at the 5 and he's fronting Joel Embiid for a good 5 to 6 minute stretch. He's just a workhorse who can do a lot of different things. And clearly he's been shooting the 3 at a very high level to start start the season on pretty decent volume, almost 5 attempts. He's over 40%. And he's also putting the ball on the floor a lot more. You're seeing him do stuff like last year, he would have had, I believe, the highest percentage of his field goal attempts were assisted last year. Like he really had to be spoon fed behind the arc in order for him to score. And he worked on the summer to be able to do some stuff above the break because he thought he was going to be able to play the three, and now that's paying dividends for him at the four as well. So I think he's definitely been a standout for the Pacers in terms of just making a lot of different lineup combinations work for them.
It was interesting. I was going to ask you about Jarris Walker. Just haven't seen him get off the bench that much so far this year, but it sounds like the way that Aaron Nesmith has continued to progress, it hasn't made it as mandatory for Jarris to play early on in his career. That seems like something that could change throughout the season as, well, maybe a guy gets injured here or there. Maybe there's a kind of a flip in the rotation, but as the 27th defensive rating, as that kind if it stays in place, it wouldn't surprise me if Jarris gets a little bit more of a run here. You talked about him kind of preseason with me. He might be their defensive option in a lot of ways in some of those lineups, just to be a bigger body and play a little bit stouter in some of those combinations. But to this point, it's hard to argue with the results here for Indiana, despite the fact that he hasn't suited up so far.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the problem for Jarris is the Pacers are kind of hovering around a 9-man rotation. Sometimes it's a 10-man rotation if they get TJ McConnell out there, and Aaron's playing at the four because they already have Andrew and TJ and Buddy. Just that's the way to get Aaron minutes. And because Jarris had some okay moments in preseason at that end of the floor, but then like he played in the fourth quarter of the one game in garbage time when the entire defense was bad against the Boston Celtics. They gave up over 150 points, but Jarris had a lot of moments where if he was switching out to Peyton Pritchard, he got beat. If he was the low man, he was making the wrong rotation. Like he really likes to chase the ball. He jumped at pump fakes. Like he just needs to be able to rein some of that in. And I think it's just going to be a matter of time for him because he's coming from a college system that ran a very aggressive hedging scheme where he had to be very proactive. And this is very different than that. The low man's very conservative. They don't do a lot of overzealousness there with help. So if he's out of position, it can kind of throw them off rhythm a bit. So I think that the idea of his defense is a little bit different than what the current reality of it is. So I don't know how they actually envision if he'll end up getting some games later on at the G League. I think that Tom Hankins, the head coach of the G League, had mentioned that in an interview that he did with Scott Agnes that they might get to see Ben Shepherd and Jarris there on occasion. But like you said, I don't think anything's set in stone. So if he does start to get a handle on some of that a little bit more, and there are some injuries, it's not like they have a ton of depth at the four spot. I mean, they typically have to play really small if they don't have one of those guys out there.
Yeah, just that seems it seemed like the natural recourse, but if he's not ready, then they're like he's not ready. That's pretty clear. Um, Last question I have for you: defense, as we mentioned, 27th. Denver started 28th last season, and they were 28th through basically November. And people in Denver were wondering, why is this happening? What's going on? How can they figure it out? And then they figured it out, and Denver won a championship. How does the defense for Indiana get from point A to point B? It's okay that it starts in the gutter basically, but how can it improve throughout the season? If you were running the team, what would you do?
I mean, I think with the scheme that they're employing, it's going to have to be a slow build, and you're going to have to hold on to those little steps that you see, like from Benedict Mathurin against the Milwaukee Bucks, and hope that those continue to accumulate as the season goes. Because the scheme is radically different from last year. They didn't have the results that they wanted. I thought a lot of that more had to do with a lot of their on-ball defense and that being leaky. But if you look at the numbers, like what they were doing schematically didn't really match what the numbers said. So they had a very aggressive nail presence. Like I said, they were overzealous with the low man at times. They did a lot of peel switching to make up for people getting beat on the perimeter, a decent amount of nexting based on reads, and yet, they were bottom 5 in points allowed in the paint. Like with that type of scheme, you should be giving more up at the 3-point line, and they were they were giving up high quality 3-point shots, even though they weren't giving up a high, above the break frequency and corner three frequency. Now they're basically they're number 1 in the NBA at limiting above the break threes, and like number 2 or 3 in limiting corner threes. So in a way, it's kind of like we need to teach this mentality of defending individual matchups, guarding your yard is the phrase that they like to say. And even though they haven't mastered that, I mean, they're bottom of the league in rim frequency and opponent points in the paint. Like this isn't necessarily working for them, but I think that you're hoping over time that gets better. And at the very least, we're limiting opponent 3-point attempts, because last year they kind of were not doing either one necessarily. I think that I'm somebody who still kind of buys into peel switching over the pursuit just because I think it's kinetic energy. I think that you run off to the perimeter instead of, especially because they have guys who are going to be more apt to get beat. They need more. Like some of it goes back to Tyrese too, because at the end of the Bulls game, as good as Tyrese has been, the Bulls hunted him relentlessly out of the same set, and they're a team that doesn't want to double. Like if it's a post mismatch, they're not going to double. Like that was rare to see them be doing that as much as they did against Embiid, and to finally make that transition against Giannis once Giannis had gotten up over 40 points in that game. They really wanted to stay home on shooters. So going to need more steps from Tyrese in terms of, in my opinion, hedge and recover is kind of have to be the solution for him if this is what they want to keep doing. So I just think the overall answer, if this is what they envision the defense to be, this is what they think the future of NBA defense is going to be, is they're just going to have to keep getting internal development. Otherwise, the answers are going to have to come externally. I think it's going to have to, at that point, it's going to have to be roster changes because they've now had same coaching staff try two radically different schemes and they're still bottom five right now. So those are really the only two paths forward, I think.
Well, we will see which path they decide to choose. I think it's probably still too early to make a firm judgment one way or the other on it. But like I said, there is capability to turn it around, to bounce back, even without a major roster change. So we will see what happens. But she is Caitlin Cooper, creator of Basketball She Wrote. Make sure to go follow her on her Patreon and follow all of her Indiana Pacers coverage. Caitlin, thank you so much for tuning in. Really appreciate it. And I'll talk to you in 6 weeks. All right.
Hey, thanks for having me again.